It has become obvious to me with the internal battles that I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
After months of internal party turmoil and lagging polling numbers, Justin Trudeau stepped down as Prime Minister in the first week of January. Mark Carney easily won the Liberal leadership contest last March and then took the Liberals to a stunning election victory in April, taking 169 seats, just 3 shy of majority government. Carney portrayed himself as the best leader to stand up to Donald Trump.
Who's ready? Who's ready? Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? And who's ready? Who's ready to build Canada strong?
A number of new Indigenous MPs were also elected, including Mandy Galmasti in northern Quebec and Rebecca Chartrand in northern Manitoba for the Liberals, and Billy Morin in Edmonton for the Conservatives. Galmasti became Minister of Indigenous Services and Chartrand to Northern Affairs. Leah Xan was re-elected in Winnipeg and Laurie Idlout in Nunavut for the NDP, but Blake Desjardins lost his seat for the party in Edmonton. The Carney government got off to a rocky start with First Nations by introducing Bill C-5, or the One Canadian Economy Act, in June. The bill fast-tracks approvals for economic projects deemed to be in the national interest. However, it was rammed through both houses of Parliament in just 2 weeks and without Indigenous consultation, angering First Nations leaders such as Mi'kmaq Senator Brian Francis.
Why are we rushing on such a consequential bill that deserves care and attention? We had the option to slow down. That was the message delivered clearly by National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepinek last week. She asked us to take the time to do things properly and reminded us that is how we build a better country. By listening, by working together, and by not rushing reconciliation.
Consequently, the government scheduled summit meetings with Indigenous leaders. The First Nations Summit took place with the Prime Minister in Gatineau, Quebec in July, and reviews were mixed.
The big push here, I think, is trying to create a framework for consultation, a framework for how are they going to see economic development or large-scale projects move throughout Canada, and they want to create a one-shop model that's going to work for everybody. I don't think that necessarily works. You have different cultures, different beliefs right across the country, and so some of us do things in a different way.
The Carney government introduced its first budget in early November with a focus on building the economy and engaging Indigenous people as economic partners. But groups like the Assembly of First Nations were generally unimpressed by the lack of funding to address Indigenous priorities.
Instead of closing the socioeconomic gaps between First Nations and non-Indigenous Canadians, this budget is going to make things worse. Ignoring those long-standing gaps and environmental standards will not help fast-track resource extraction projects.
Jocelyn Forsma, then CEO of the National Association of Friendship Centres, expressed disappointment at funding cuts to her organization.
I think I'm just really worried about what it signals for where this government's heading with reconciliation. I'm really concerned that reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is going to be contingent upon how we can demonstrate our benefit to the economy. And that's not really, what reconciliation was supposed to be about.
At the end of November, the Carney government signed a memorandum of understanding with Alberta that includes a proposed pipeline from that province to the west coast. The Liberals did so without consulting the BC government or coastal First Nations. This was met with negative response at the Assembly of First Nations winter meeting in early December in Ottawa. The Prime Minister did a question and answer session with chiefs at the end of the first day of the winter meeting and was taken to task by Nestaniga First Nation Chief Gary Cuises, whose community has been under a boil water advisory for more than 3 decades.
And hearing you comments that you've been lifting boil water advisories in Canada, but I don't know which part of country you're talking about. That's water is being lifted, but our community hasn't been lifted for 30 years.
To which Carney was forced to admit the government had failed the community.
And that's a failure, to be absolutely clear. You know it's a failure, you've lived through it. most of your adult life. It's a failure of execution, and this is one of the things that this government is very focused on, is setting objectives, being clear about the objectives, determining why things have not worked as well as they should.
In the new year, the Prime Minister is committed to including First Nations in federal, provincial, and territorial First Ministers' meetings. The government has also said it'll introduce a First Nations Clean Water Act in the spring session. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.